Okay, so the first question I have here is solve the equation t squared minus 2t minus 6 equals 0 and write the roots in the form of d plus or minus the square root of e. So when the question says to write it in this form, it means that I need a plus or minus, I need a square root in my answer, and d and e, we know they're variables, but they are elements of z, and z is the symbol for integer. And an integer is any positive or negative whole number. So we need to write it in this form where I have a positive or negative whole number here, plus or minus the square root of a positive or negative whole number here. Now you can see that this is a square root, but another word for square root is surds. And before we answer this question, I want to just remind ourselves of what a surd is. So if I have, say, the square root of 54. Now another way I can write the square root of 54 is the square root of 9 by the square root of 6. And obviously I can spot here that the square root of 9 I can write as 3. And so another way of writing root 54 is 3 root 6. So I know we've learned that before, but just to kind of remind ourselves. So that's one way in which you can break down surds. So I guess we're back to the question in hand now. Solve the equation t squared minus 2t minus 6 equals 0. If you see a square, a letter, and a number, you have to conclude that this here is a quadratic equation. And it's asking us to write the roots, or write the place where it cuts the x-axis, in the form of d plus root e. So they're telling us here that we can't do it by factorization. We need to do this by using the formula, by using the minus b formula. So that's exactly what I'm going to do first of all. Okay, so I have t squared minus 2t minus 6. And we always know that when we're using the minus b formula, step 1 is of course to write down the formula. And step 2 then is to assign your a, b and c, so to fill in your variables. So in this instance I can see that my a is always going to be the number in front of the x squared, or in this case the t squared, and it is 1. My b is the number in front of the letter, so the x or the t, and in this case it is minus 2. And my c is the constant, so the number at the end, which in this case is minus 6. So I'll fill in my formula as follows. And I'm going to say that x is equal to minus b. And b I know is minus 2, so I'm going to keep that in brackets. So minus 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is going to be minus 2 to be squared, minus 4, minus 4, bracket a, which is 1, and c, which is minus 6. And that is all over 2a, so 2 times, in this instance, a is 1. Okay, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to follow the same steps that I had before and just work that out a little bit. So it's important that we recognise that a minus by a minus here gives me a plus. So I'm going to be left with plus 2 plus or minus the square root of. Any number squared will always be a positive. And I know calculators don't do this right if you don't place the brackets incorrectly. So minus 2 squared is going to give me minus 2 by minus 2. A minus by a minus is a plus. So here I will have 4, and here I'll have minus 6 times 1 is minus 6, and minus 6 times minus 4 is going to give me plus 24, all over 2. 2 ones are 2. So we tidy it up a little bit, bring on the next section, and it is plus 2, plus or minus the square root of 28, all over 2. Now, at this point, I need to try and break this 28 down a little bit, if I can. And another way of writing the square root of 28 would be to write it as square root of 14 times square root of 2. Or another way I can write it is also square root of 7 by the square root of 4. And this will actually help me straight away because I know that the square root of 4 is 2, whereas both of these will work out to be decimals. So we are actually going to use this one here. I think that will be the easiest one for me. So I'll now write it as 2 plus or minus root 7 by root 4, which essentially is 2, all over 2, and bring it down a little bit further, and it will be 2 plus or minus, instead of writing root 4 now, I'm going to write root 4 is 2, so it'll be 2 root 7, all over 2. And the last bit then is I just need to divide that all by 2, which I can now easily do. 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 2 here once, and so my answer is 1 plus root 7 and 1 minus root 7. So that's how you leave your answer in third form if that's what the question requires you to do. Okay, so step 1, follow through, write down your formula. At this point here, this is the bit of work that you need. So you can write out a few different combinations, but what you're looking for here, guys, is you're looking for something that's going to work out a little bit easier. And so root 4 is 2, and that was probably the best option I could have chosen there. So 7 by root 4 is the same as root 7 by 2, and that's the same as writing 2 root 7. The second example I want to talk about today is one where you're asked to work out a quadratic equation using your minus b formula, giving it correct 2 decimal places, but it's not in the way we would normally expect to find a quadratic equation. And you can see the difference with this as opposed to a normal one, the ones that we've previously looked at, is that we're dealing with fractions here. And so we just have one extra step to try and get rid of the fraction, and then after that it's the same process again. So you can see here, if I was to write everything as a fraction, I would have x squared divided by 3 plus was 2x, and as a fraction it's 2x over 1 minus 1 over 2 equals 0. So I suppose we want to write everything as a fraction. When you're adding and subtracting fractions, you know yourself from primary school, you can only add and subtract fractions if they have the same number on the bottom, and if they don't, you must find a common denominator. And this is very reminiscent of our works that we've done already with solving algebraic fractions. So I've got my denominators here are 3, 1 and 2, and the lowest common denominator between all three is 6, so they all go into 6. And I'm going to say to myself, okay, so 3 goes into 6 twice, so that is 2 times x squared. And then 1 goes into 6 times, so it's 6 times 2x plus 6 times 2x. And the last one then is 2 goes into 6 3 times, and don't forget your minus here, so it is minus 3 times 1 equals 0. Okay, so what I have at this point is I have 2x squared plus 6 times 2x minus 3 times 1 all over 6. And so now what I want to do, the best thing I can do is get rid of this fraction. So how do I do that? Well, I do that by balancing the equations. So this is divided by 6. If I multiply this side by 6 and I multiply this by 6, I'll have balanced, and these 6's will cancel out. So division of 6 and a multiplication of 6 will cancel out. And obviously 0 times 6 is 0. So my new line here is, and I'm going to work out the top brackets up here, 2 times x squared, which is going to give me 2x squared. 2 times plus 6, 2x times plus 6 gives me plus 12x. And then the last bit, minus 3 times 1 gives me minus 3. And so now we have the traditional quadratic equation essentially here. we have got our x squared, our 12x, and our number equals 0. And at this point, we can go about doing exactly what we would have done normally already. So, step 1 is obviously write down your formula. And I am noticing that a few people in class are not writing it down each question. You need to get into the habit of doing that for each question, or at least at top of the page that you have your sums done, but really you need to have it written down for each question. So step 1, write down the formula. Step 2 is write down your a, b and c. So using this formula here, I can see that 2x squared in front of the x squared, so my a is equal to 2. My b is what's ever in front of the x, which in this case is plus 12. And then my c is whatever numbers at the end, which in this case is minus 3. So we will apply the formula now. And it is minus 12 plus or minus the square root of 12 all to be squared. So I'm just following this here. Minus 4. AC means A multiplied by C, and so it's 4 times 2 times minus 3, and that is all over 2A, and in this case our A is 2, so it's 2 times 2. Alright, we tidy up a little bit, so it's minus 12 plus or minus the square root of 12 squared is 144. Now we take this in little stages. Minus 3 times 2 gives me minus 6. And minus 6 times minus 4. A minus by a minus gives me a plus. And 6 4s are 24. So I now have plus 24 all over 2 2s, which are 4. Running out of space. And then we'll tidy up a little bit more. So it is minus 12. Plus or minus the square root of 144 plus 124 is 168, all divided by 4. They asked in this question, if we go back to it, they asked to leave it to 2 decimal places, so we will be working out our swords in this case, or surds in this case. So down I go. And the square root of 168, I'll have to get my calculator out. Square root of 168 equals 12.96. So it is minus 12 plus 12.96 all over 4, and minus 12 minus 12.96 all over 4. When further worked out in a calculator, this section here, minus 12 plus 12.96 divided by 4, will give me 0.24. Or the second answer, or the second root I can have, is minus 12 and minus 12.96 divided by 4, which gives me minus 6.24.